I have talked to some businesses who say, we don't want to invest in making our website accessible. We're not likely to get sued, and maybe it won't actually be that expensive anyway. So on the small business side, the range that's estimated is between $19,000 and $45,000 for a single lawsuit. The big business side could be over $350,000. What's important to note is some of these lawsuits, it's just because you get sued once doesn't mean you can't be sued again. We have a client right now, actually, who got sued twice.
Accessibility actually might begin and it might stem before you actually did any design on the website or deployed a single line of code. You might have a brand style guide that actually isn't accessible itself. It might not have a high enough contrast ratio. So some of the times we might have to go to the very beginning and fix your brand identity kit instead. What we're going to be diving into is an important topic about what is website accessibility. And an accessible website is one that can really be utilized by everyone. And when people are starting to think about accessibility items and issues, people really are thinking about two things ordinarily. They might be thinking about somebody who is blind or somebody who is deaf and might need to utilize closed captions in order to be able to actually understand what a video context is if they can't hear it. But in reality, what we have shown here is we have a lot of different folks from all over the globe, right? And not all disabilities are necessarily one that you can see. So when we think about the different layers of accessibility, that also extends to what many of us are all going to do eventually is age, right? And we're aging. And as we continue to do that, we have different items that could impair, let's say, our visual capabilities. Other items that tend to affect males more than females would be something along the lines of being able to actually see colors all at the same fashion. So color blindness. And then you also have situational items. So if you'll notice in the screen here, we have about 16 different people. And in that middle there's an image of a mother holding a baby. And so that is a new situation where she's only going to be able to use a single hand. And that is going to be a situational item where she's going to have different ability to be able to interact with your website, with your mobile device. Accessibility is more than just somebody who might be blind or deaf, and that there's lots of different layers to the pie can really make a big difference. So when we're thinking about that, let's think about what that might be and how it might affect as far as your revenue. So let's think about that market size. So the market size, so the percentage of people who have disabilities. So the World Health Organization, or WHO, they anticipate that there's roughly 1.3 billion people, or about 16% of the global population, that is affected by one form or another of some type of disability. The CDC here in the United States states that 1 in 4 U.S. adults, or approximately 25% of the population, is affected in one way, shape, or form. And so if you actually translate that into the spending power of people with disabilities and their families, that's roughly 13 trillion. So when we're thinking about making your website more accessible, it is, yes, making certain that you can have a website that is for everybody, but it also can make an impact to your direct bottom line. So we want to be thinking about it from both sides of the spectrum. And when you start really realizing the who in the situation of who is affected, you're going to be able to help instill change within your organization so that more people are going to take accessibility seriously.
So Jeremy you were talking a lot about getting buy-in at your organization. And sometimes this motivation of seeing, well, how many people in our customer base are affected is very motivational. But the reality is there are also a lot of organizations who are motivated more by the stick instead of the carrot, which is unfortunate, but the reality. So we're going to spend just a few minutes talking about the laws and how it impacts. It's important to note that neither Jeremy nor myself are attorneys, so we're not giving you legal advice. We're just sharing the information that we're aware of from our research, from talking to attorneys, our own and others that work in the digital accessibility space. But we definitely would recommend that you go out and do some additional research to determine how this might impact your organization. There are laws around the world, though, that do require websites to be accessible. I have just a small number of those laws on the slide here today. So in the United States, that's the Americans with Disabilities Act, which applies to a broad sector of both private, government, nonprofit, and for-profit entities. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973, specifically sections 504 and 508, which most commonly apply to organizations that receive federal funding. So this could be something like an actual federal website. It could also be a university website, or it could be a nonprofit or a business website. If, let's say, you got a rural development grant, then that would fall under some of these things. The Affordable Care Act is a wide-reaching law that includes some accessibility requirements for any healthcare entities. So if you are a doctor's office, or you have clients that are a doctor's office and they take Medicare or Medicaid, then they fall under the Affordable Care Act requirements for accessibility. Outside of the United States, there is Canada, just our friends up north of us, and they have the Accessible Canada Act, which is across the entire country. Many different provinces and territories are also putting laws into place. The accessibility for Ontarians with disabilities is one that was talked about a lot, like maybe 2 years ago, because that was when their threshold applied for that. Accessibility for Manitobans Act is actually coming up next year, and it's going to require any entity that has one employee or more to have an accessible website. So even very small businesses are going to be impacted by this law. And there are many others in different provinces and territories, but these are probably the two biggest ones that a lot of people across Canada are talking about. So obviously you don't have to be located in any of these regions. If you have customers in this region or employees in this region, then the law may apply to your organization. And then across the ocean, over in Europe, the big one that people are talking about right now is the European Accessibility Act, which requires websites, particularly with a huge focus on e-commerce and also ebooks and e-readers, to be accessible by June 2025. The United Kingdom's Equality Act from 2010 had requirements for accessibility within the United Kingdom that includes websites. So there are just a lot of laws around the world that can apply. What happens if you don't comply with these laws? It's very broad. And if you're talking about this within the organization, maybe with your manager, with shareholders, or you're an agency and you're talking with clients, what is the risk here? It really varies on the law, what type of entity it is, what kind of business. But broadly, one of the biggest things is there could be fines. So what are some examples of this? The Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or the AODA, includes fines of up to 100,000 Canadian dollars for corporations or 50,000 Canadian dollars for individuals per day. So this could get quite expensive if you're thinking about something that's happening over many, many days before it gets remediated. In European Accessibility Acts, the way that works is it's actually something that goes out and tells all the member countries, you need to create laws to enforce and ensure that people are meeting this accessibility standard that we're setting, but it's not uniform across Europe. So in many ways, like we've heard with GDPR and privacy, where different countries that are member states within the European Union have set out different requirements there, like in Germany, they don't like Google fonts, but maybe in other ones, it's not as big of a deal. It's very similar. So what I've seen for the European Accessibility Act is as low as 5,000 euros. Germany I've seen up to 500,000 euros as a fine. So there can be the financial consequence of actually having a fine, but the other big financial consequence, which has come into play, is loss of federal funding or tax breaks. And sometimes this could be millions if they're saying, hey, you're not going to get your subsidies for 6 months until you resolve this, or as punishment for not resolving it, or you're losing your tax breaks. That could really cost an organization a lot of money. Ireland has actually implemented up to 18 months of jail time. Now, I don't think they're going to say to you, your website's not accessible. You're going to jail. I'm not here to try and scare you. I don't think that's the way this is going to play out. I mean, I don't know. But what I expect is that's probably the more intense, like someone lied or committed fraud. We saw in California in January or February, there was a lawsuit where the entity it had built a website, said it was accessible, and they ended up having to pay $2 million in damages, and it came actually as a fraud because they had lied, right? So maybe that's where the jail time is going to come in if someone's being dishonest or someone's literally refusing to comply when they're ordered to comply by the government. But that said, there is actual jail time in some places around the world related to this. And then the big one in the United States, the way the Americans with Disabilities Act is enforced, for better or for worse, is through lawsuits. And so any business or website puts their organization at risk of getting a legal complaint. In the United States, in 2023, there were 4,605 lawsuits related to website accessibility under the Americans with Disabilities Act. 82% of these were for e-commerce businesses, 7% were food service, and then the rest were just spread a lot of across many different verticals. So depending upon what kind of website it is, you may be at greater risk of a legal complaint. We'll circle back to this later, but an interesting note here is that 933, so about a quarter of the lawsuits were against businesses that already had an accessibility overlay or widget or toolbar on them. So those are not necessarily protective of getting sued and don't necessarily solve accessibility problems on a website. And the top states where lawsuits are being filed are New York, California, and Florida. This is because the Americans with Disabilities Act at the federal level doesn't specify any sort of damages. However, these states do. They have specific things. And you can sort of see on the screen, we have a graph that shows ADA website accessibility lawsuits that have been filed from 2016 through 2023. And we went from 262 in 2016, 814 in 2017, then jump up to 2,314 in 2018. And it's been steadily going up. 2021, 2022, we're sort of flat, both around 4,055, 4,061. But then, as we mentioned, that 4,605 lawsuits in 2023. And what does it cost if you get sued? It's not just, do you have to pay damages? It's also the time that you have to invest in it, the money that you might have to pay for your attorney for settling it. So Chris Rivenberg, who is an attorney, and DQ, who's another accessibility company in the space, they have put out some numbers on what does it look like if an organization gets sued for website accessibility. I think these are important because I have talked to some people who say, you know, my client or my boss says, well, we'll just deal with that when it comes. We're not likely to get sued. We don't want to invest in making our website accessible. And maybe it won't actually be that expensive anyway. So I think it's good to have this perspective. So on the small business side, the range that's estimated is between $19,000 and $45,000 for a single lawsuit. What's important to note is some of these lawsuits, it's just because you get sued once doesn't mean you can't be sued again. And there are entities, we have a client right now actually who got sued twice by two different people. And so they had to do double this, right? So the breakdown on that range is maybe $5,000 to $15,000 to pay the plaintiff's law firm fees, $5,000 to your own defense attorneys, then $5,000 to $20,000 for website audit and remediation. Then if you have to pay damages in California, the minimum damages is $4,000. You get a range on that because different attorneys charge different hourly rates, those sorts of things. But the reality is in almost all instances, when a business gets sued, they settle. They agree to make their website accessible as a result of the lawsuit, and they pay out some sort of damage. They pay their attorney's fees, and they pay all of the plaintiff's attorney's fees. So it costs money, and then in the end, you have to make your website accessible anyway. The big business side could be over $350,000 because these are much more expensive lawsuits with much more expensive attorneys. So it's not necessarily just a simple cost of doing business. It is something that it's money that you're throwing away from being able to serve your business well, and that much better you could just invest in the accessibility up front.
And when you start embarking on this journey, right, we want to be thinking about the carrot as well. What are those benefits of accessibility? And when you're starting to go through and you are really optimizing the code and the content that is going to improve the experience for everybody on your website, you're actually going to get some very positive benefits as well. Number one, you could have a benefit of better SEO and greater search visibility within organic. And that doesn't matter if it's Yahoo, Bing, Google, everything along those lines. When you're going to be optimizing your site, such as, let's say, adding alt text for different images, having the right hierarchy of your H tags, all of this is going to make it easier for these search engine crawlers to be able to crawl your site, but it's also going to make it more accessible so that your website can be able to tap in to all different people with all different disability types. So by making these improvements incrementally for web accessibility, it actually can have a benefit of better SEO. Better SEO means more traffic to your website. More traffic can mean higher conversions. So another thing, when you think about your website, a primary call to action on a website might be where you want somebody to actually fill out a submission form. And this would be if you are on a screen reader and your ability to tab through and enter in the first name, last name, email, and phone number, and then enter in to submit that form. If it can be done in an accessible fashion, a lot of people utilize the web in a lot of different ways, right? Like I am awful when it comes down to text messaging. I have never trained myself to use two hands. I use one hand, and I'm so much slower than the rest of the population. So don't assume the way that you use the web is the way that others use the web. So you can actually make it easy if somebody wants to actually be quick and just tab through your website. If they have a disability or not, they're going to be able to make it easier to be able to actually fill out those types of submission forms. So it can lead to increased conversions. And then reduced operational costs. This might be a little bit tricky to be able to actually wrap our heads around. But if somebody's running into issues, being able to utilize your site, what could happen is they could reach out and get in contact with, let's say, your customer support. They might have to go into a physical brick and mortar store in order to be able to make a purchase, opposed to be able to just do so online. So it could actually cause additional cost burden directly to your organization by not being accessible. And then truly living by your organizational values. Here at Multidots, we have 7 different values that we live by. And one of those is do the right thing, right? And so if you do what's right, it also can benefit not only making the web a greater place, but it can actually benefit your organization, right? It can have you be in a better light for everybody who is interacting with your site. So those are some of the benefits and the positive items of taking accessibility seriously and going on that journey step by step. And I think Amber is going to share just a few real life scenarios as far as case studies of organizations that they partnered with in order to be able to truly see some of these in real life. So Amber, I'll pass it back to you to go over the Highland Community College case study.
Yeah, so Highland Community College came to us last year. They actually were in mandated remediation with the Office of Civil Rights as part of the Department of Education. What I thought was so interesting about my experience working with, we didn't actually do, as part of this remediation, any sort of redesign on the site. We did not add any new content. The only time something got modified design-wise or aesthetically was if it was functionally like not accessible in the back end, or like there's a color contrast issue. We resolved that, so that impacted the way it looked in the design. But structurally, it was all mostly underlying HTML fixes. And what we found from that, when we looked at it, we did the remediation over 8 months, kind of spaced out each month. We were doing some things, meeting regularly with the Office of Civil Rights attorneys and like keeping track of progress on the legal side. And then when we looked from January through May and we compared that to the prior year, they hadn't done anything different in their marketing, nothing else. What they found was that there was 15.1% increase in unique users who came to the site. without them doing any extra SEO, no extra marketing. It just improved that much. Users were spending an average of 1 additional minute on the site, and they had an increase of 1.7% in their online application, which is huge for them because that's one of the main reasons why they exist, is to try and give more people access to education. And all of this happened just because of the accessibility remediation without any significant design or content changes. Now, what happens if you also roll in design updates and content changes and overall UX and structural changes? Well, then you can see really massive increases. So the case study that I have up here are the results from a accessibility first redesign and rebuild that we did for Workforce Solutions Panhandle, which did include like fixing the design, totally rethinking how the navigation menus were structured, maybe adding some content in some places. And within a year, what they saw was 300% increase in page views, 40% increase in the average session duration. And they actually, Workforce Solutions Panhandle is a state entity that serves people. So they're constantly like getting feedback from people, and they ask people what their response was. And they were running independent surveys, and they had a 97% customer satisfaction rate with how people were interacting with this website versus previously they frequently had to actually come into that office and work with people in person. So this was really huge. So you can really see massive benefits from thinking about accessibility, either just from a remediation standpoint or by including it in a redesign, and really making your customers happy, making the website show up more and getting more of those results that you want out of the website. So we've talked a lot about why accessibility matters, both on the scary side and the wonderful side. But let's say you want to make your website accessible. How do you know if your website is accessible?
So I think step number 1 is we have to understand where the problems come from, right? And problems really come from 3 different places. So number 1, that could be inaccessible branding. Number 2, that could be incorrectly entered content. And number 3, that could be the underlying code of your website. So let's just start. What is inaccessible branding? Well, inaccessible branding actually might begin and it might stem before you actually did any design on the website or deployed a single line of code. And this isn't something that somebody maliciously had as far as ill intent, but when it comes down to design, you might have a brand style guide that actually isn't accessible itself. It might not have a high enough contrast ratio, right? You might be utilizing, let's say, a quite light color on an even lighter color. And then if that style guide is then passed to, let's say, a third-party design agency or even internally, that design team, when they're doing your website design, is going to be following those style guidelines that they have been given to them. And then now you've actually had the root of the problem stem and grow throughout the entire website. So some of the times we might have to go to the very beginning and look at your brand identity kit, the style guideline colors, and it might be worthwhile introducing, a few other colors into that color palette in order to be able to help. Other areas that are not as common as of now could be, let's say if you have a CEO or a lead designer who really wants to go with this wild and wacky font type. Well, a wild and wacky font type could be fun for that one person, but is it truly going to be fun to everybody, right? If you don't live in Austin and keep Austin weird, some other organizations and people might say, this is a hard font to read, especially if we go back to the beginning slides, right? Where we're thinking about as people continue to age. So we want to make certain that the typography, the font families that we're going to be able to utilize throughout the site are actually easy to read. We don't want to mix up, is that an I or is that an L, right? There's a lot of different letters that could be hard to distinguish. So that's where the foundation begins. Number 2, incorrectly entered content. So let's say that you're embarking on a website redesign. And we work with organizations of all shapes and sizes. Sometimes very large enterprise organizations is who we primarily serve. And when we're doing a website redesign, oftentimes there's lots of different department heads who are producing and creating new content. And they might be doing so utilizing Microsoft Word. And then those Microsoft Word documents, right, are passed off and then they're development team members, either in-house or us, would be in charge of applying that content onto the new layout structure. And if somebody is not educated and understands the framework of accessibility, they might copy and paste, let's say, a subtitle, and they might choose, let's say, an H5 tag or an H1 tag much further down. And so now we're not following the right hierarchy of like H1, H2, H3. So we don't want to just choose based on a nice look and feel, like that looks like a nice color or a nice size, but we should actually be thinking about the hierarchy of how things are entered. Another thing, and this will be fun for everybody to be able to enter into chat, is images. It doesn't take that much time, but all images should have an applied alt text or an alternative text. So if an image cannot be shown, what would be that alternative descriptive text? So when we're thinking about alt text, you want it to be descriptive. So it could be, what is it that we're looking at? And we're looking at something that is an illustration. It's an illustration of what? It's an illustration of a cartoon character, an illustration of Popeye. And what is Popeye doing? An illustration of Popeye with his arms held out, stopping two streams of water. So that could be a good alt text. And even though it doesn't take that much time, by putting alt text for each of your images, you can also enhance your SEO. If somebody has an issue with their browser, it could actually show if the image doesn't render, if somebody's on a screen reader. So these are things that can be done, and also incorrectly or just simply missing content, such as captioning for videos. All of these could be items as far as incorrectly entered content. So again, these are things that are important to think about. And then what happens is code. When we're talking about WordPress sites, which is what we focus in on, code comes from a lot of different things. And that's actually why Popeye is showing here, because Popeye is trying to keep the website accessible. But there's lots of different places coming from all different items, including the WordPress theme, the plugins that are installed on the site. And there could be dozens of plugins on a single site, and third-party embeds. So it's important. And when it comes down to code fixes, when you're in the process of running a tool such as the one that Equalize Digital offers, the accessibility checker, you're going to be able to identify some of these issues. And if you don't have in-house dev resources, you may have to reach out for some outside third-party assistance to remediate some of these items, such as code fixes to certain plugins or embeds. It might be a little bit more technical in nature, but there's lots of areas where those problems come from. So next, what I want to talk about is, realistically, when it comes down to how you should set up your site, what code standards should you follow, or what accessibility standards? So there's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and internationally, these are agreed upon testable standards that were created by volunteers in the Worldwide Consortium, or known as W3C. And what we want to be thinking about is the current and the most latest version is 2.2. And most laws require a minimum of 2.1 conformance. And one thing that sometimes is misunderstood is 2.2 actually encompasses everything from 2.1 conformance. So you want to really be setting yourself up for the most future stated item as far as any of these laws that Amber was going to be talking about, and have 2.2 conformance. And there are 3 different levels underneath of that. There's single A, double A, and triple A. Triple A conformance is going to be a little bit more difficult to be able to meet, but that is the highest level of the standard. So the best practice, and to meet legal requirements, if you go after double A compliance with 2.2 double A accessibility guidelines, that's going to be the best bet forward, because if you go after a single A compliance, you're actually not going to meet all of those legal requirements. So we'll have resources in this deck where you can actually click and you can dive into more of these guidelines. But if you just take any note away, go after 2.2 AA compliance, and that's going to be your best bet forward, because it's going to meet all of the accessibility guidelines across the board in all of those different countries and provinces that we have talked about in this webinar so far.
So let's talk about, how would you actually test for all these guidelines, which, if you aren't familiar with web content accessibility guidelines, you'll need to do a little bit of reading. But there are some ways to get started that don't require you to be an accessibility expert. The first one is you can run an automated bulk scanning tool like our Equalize Digital Accessibility Checker plugin. So what we have here, and I think Paula can probably throw a link. If you go to equalizedigital.com/demo, there's a form. The only reason there's a form there is because we use InstaWP for this and their form isn't totally accessible. So ours, you just submit and it will create an InstaWP and you can fake. Sure. This homepage has a big top. There's products that go over to WooCommerce with the shoes. They're on the homepage, a button where you can learn more. And that demo has the free version, but also the pro version and our audit history plugin, which I won't really have time today to walk through all of it, but if you want to look at all that and play with it, you can. But in base, even just at the free version, at the bottom of the editor, using a page builder, our front end tool works like an Elementor or Beaver Builder, those sorts of things. You can also use it there. But at the bottom, I can see on the home page, it has 3% pass test. There's 21 errors, 8 contrast errors, 17 warnings. And if I click from the summary to the details tab, I could go through and see what they are. So we've got 8 insufficient color contrast, 6 incorrect heading order, 4 linked image empty alternative text, empty links, missing form labels, all sorts of things. And if I'm sort of saying, boy, I don't even, know where these are, I could click through some of these and get them to find them for me on the front end. So it loads accessibility checker on the front end. Maybe if it's, there we go. And it said limited stock available. This is tagged as a heading 4. That would help me find it if I wasn't sure. Sometimes you can just see them, obviously. So if I scroll up, I can see this. Well, this probably actually doesn't make sense as a heading 4, right? I have to think about, this is a section. It probably actually should be a heading 2. So if I were to change my heading tag, but maybe I don't want it to be that big. This is where sometimes you have to think about this. The block editor is a little bit nice because we can, and I'm not super used to this page builder, so you'll have to bear with me a tiny bit here, but we could say it has to structurally be an H2, but I don't really want it to be that big. I still want it to be smaller. So that's when Jeremy mentioned using the correct heading order, you don't pick it by size. One of the nice things in WordPress is that we can still tag something as a heading 2, but a lot of times you could then make it look like how you wanted your H4 to look. So if I were to do that and I were to hit save, that's going to trigger it to rescan the page. And then when I go down here, I'm going to have slightly fewer. I went from 21 errors to 20. And if I click on that, I can now see that one H4 is no longer being flagged for incorrect heading order. So that's a very quick way to look at this. It is an automated testing tool that helps you find issues, and it can really speed you up on some of these things and help your content creators stay on track. That said, it is important to know that automated testing tools cannot find everything. They, depending on who you ask and which tool you ask, I think, it's probably safe to say that they're going to find between 30 to 40% of the problems on a page. So you also need to manually test a representative sample of your content. So you want to use your keyboard only, like Jeremy mentioned, hitting the tab key, making sure you can get through. Can you submit every form? Can you start and stop videos? Can you check out and buy a product only with your keyboard? Use a screen reader. There are free screen readers. Turn on reduced motion in your operating system and make sure that when you have that turned on, your carousel isn't still sliding, any sort of autoplay videos are not playing. Then you also want to zoom in to 200%, zoom into 400%, make sure that no content is lost, that you can still use the website at 200 and 400%, because this is how a low vision user might be engaging with the website on a desktop zoomed in that much. And then, of course, as a bonus, bring in screen reader users or other people with disabilities. We have all these resources listed on the slide, mostly because we want to give them to you. I don't have time to talk through all of them, but we're happy to answer any questions, or you can follow up with us after the webinar. But there's a lot of different reference materials, and then also some browser extensions that are free that I find handy and helpful when I am testing as well. So once you've found all of these problems, what do you do with them? How do you remediate them? Number one is you need to set up a foundation for making accessibility improvements and maintaining the site over time. So if you don't already have sort of a version control process, if you don't have a staging site where you can test things out away from people's eyes, make sure you get those set up first. You need to make sure that you have sort of normal WordPress best practices for development set up for the site. And then outlining your remediation process and prioritizing things. So I have an image on the screen of an example of one of our remediation plan trackers. And basically what we do is we put all our issues up at the top. They're pending, not started. Then they go through almost like, it's like a Kanban flow. So they go to remediation in progress, ready for internal QA. Then sometimes they need customer review when we're doing this for customers. Like if something requires a color change, then we might ask them to approve it on staging before we actually push it live. Then we push it live and then we mark them as done. But basically figuring out how are you going to workflow things through, because accessibility is a journey, especially if you're remediating an existing site. It's not going to just happen overnight. You might be working on this for months, and that's okay. And that's normal. What matters is that you're putting progress in and planning it. And then with that, I mentioned you need to identify priorities. So the way we prioritize fixes is we look at all global elements. So we'll start with the header and the navigation menu. Make sure people can use your navigation menu to get around your site. That's like number one in getting your site to be functional. Then we look at the footer. So things that exist in widget areas, sidebars that are on multiple pages. How can we fix those? And we look for things that are critical blockers. So forms, cart modals that are inaccessible, any sort of pop-ups that are very important for, like, let's say getting notified of a discount. If the blind people are not notified of the discount, but only sighted people are, then that's discrimination, right? So all of these critical blockers that would stop someone from being able to do the very important things. Then we look at pages where conversion happens. So a lot of times we're looking like working bottom of the funnel up. So make sure do your checkout page first, then your cart page, then your single product page, then your product archive, if you sort of think about it in that way. And then also any high traffic pages where you're sending ads to, 100%, like those are ones that you want to prioritize. And then you just strategically roll out fixes over time. Doing many small releases is better, in my opinion, than longer sprints with massive releases, because every little tiny fix can make a difference for people. The screenshot that I have up here on the screen shows, which you can go see if you go to the Open Issues tab in the demo. It's a little different than this. I think this is from a different website. But one of the ways that Accessibility Tracker Pro helps with this is that you can group by specific issues, and you could choose to work on the errors first or the warnings second, right? Things that you know are blockers. You could just say, for example, I'm going to go through and I'm going to find all the linked images that don't have alternative text or all the empty links. And I'm going to go through and fix those, because that obviously is a blocker for people. And then once you've started building this out, of course, you want to ensure that your website stays accessible over time. So you want to establish any accessibility governance policies and practices for your organization if they don't exist. So the key questions to ask when creating these policies are, one, who is responsible? Is there one person who's going to be like your accessibility champion? Or are you creating a committee or a team that's going to oversee accessibility? And then how do other people at the organization connect with that person? How do they ask for reviews or feedback? What power does that person have to overrule, like, let's say a designer who says, no, I really want to use this color or this font. So really thinking about who is responsible, who owns it. Then how restrictive of publishing do you want to be? This is something that needs to happen with discussions. If there are accessibility problems on a new landing page, for example, are you going to require that they be fixed before that landing page can be published and the campaign can be created on AdWords? It is really important to document this and to create a written policy, because it's the best way to ensure that people don't just say, oh, well, we'll just publish it and we'll circle back and fix the accessibility problems later. Because I'm going to tell you right now that almost never happens, or it takes a long time. And that's when you really get into trouble, when you're saying, no, we're just trying to run fast. We really need to get the, no, we have a written policy at our company that we don't launch things with accessibility problems. So get that written down. And then what if something, slips through the cracks? It's missed. We're all human. Accidents happen. So what is the problem? How do you address those problems? What is the policy around them? Do you take something offline? Or do you have an expected turnaround of, okay, well, this got published, but it can stay up, but we have a requirement of within 48 business hours, the accessibility problem needs to be remediated. What happens if you have somebody who is continually making accessibility issues on the website repeated, and you can tell that it's one content creator? So sort of thinking about those is important. Of course, you need to test at regular intervals, including users of assistive technology where possible. You want to offer regular training opportunities for your teams. Circling back to the laws, some of the laws, particularly laws in Canada, actually have very specific annual training requirements that include very specific topics that have to be included. So I would definitely check with your legal counsel about, are there specific topics that we are required by law to provide training to our web team, for example. And consider restricting editing with appropriate user roles. Not everyone in WordPress should be an admin. I said it. I know some people are like, no, everyone just gets full control. But the reality is no. If you have someone whose job is to write blog posts for your marketing team, they probably don't need to be an administrator where they can edit the header sidebar. They probably shouldn't be installing plugins on your website. They should just be doing their job, which is authoring really great content. So use user roles in WordPress. They're so easy to do that, and to even make custom user roles if you need to do that, or you could work with a team like Multidots to help you figure out what those user roles need to be. But the big thing I always like to say is don't be reactive. Using a tool like ours is great because it puts feedback in the editor. You can actually review and fix things on draft status. You don't have to wait until it's published and then wait for a monthly scan to run or a weekly scan to run. Running scans on already published content and then fixing problems, that's what I call reactive remediation. So as much as possible, you want to try to not do that, because doing that means that you are publishing inaccessible content to the web before you can fix it. Remediation is always more costly than doing things right in the first time. If you have to pay your content creator, who's maybe an hourly contractor, to go back and fix things instead of just having them put that extra few minutes in before they publish it, then that is more expense for your organization. So as much as you can include accessibility tools right within your WordPress website, the better it's going to be. I know a lot of people ask on including accessibility tools in their WordPress website, what about overlays? Jeremy, what do you think about overlays?
So, I mean, AI is all of the talk of the town right now, right? Everybody's talking about how AI is going to transform the world. And so quick fix solutions utilizing AI and accessibility overlays is not necessarily always the solution, right? It's not recommended because if you read the fine print, they don't guarantee 100% compliance or accessibility. And so what we have here on this slide is actually an image. And a thing that's a little bit comical about this image is it is one of these accessibility overlay widgets. And the widget itself, if you'll notice, it has a salmon-like color that is being utilized for some of the text, and then a gray background. And that actually doesn't have a high enough contrast ratio to be passing accessibility guidelines. So I think that itself speaks a lot of weight as far as how much trust you can put in these tools. And there's an increasing number of lawsuits against websites who are already utilizing these types of tools. And if you download this slide deck, there is an example PDF. It happens to be a PDF of a lawsuit that took place versus an e-commerce eyeglasses company. And it will go into more granular details about an overlay that they were already utilizing and still some of the issues that were presented. One of those types of issues was there was already an alt text that was input on one of the images, and the accessibility overlay actually created conflicting alt text that was inaccurate. So we have to understand that, right, even though we live in a world where we want something very, very, very quick, right at our fingertips, right? We want an Uber and we want it now. We want our food delivered and we want it now. We are scrolling through constant media and we're constantly getting an array of information that is happening very quickly. It does have to be something that we're willing to put in the effort if we want truly long-term accurate solutions. So the recommendation is be aware of quick fix AI solutions when it comes down to your accessibility fixes. And what you might want to do is reach out and get in contact with professionals in the topic who focus on the subject matter, right? And there's really no better organization in the space than Equalize Digital. And that's why we've decided to partner and do this webinar so that we can help continue to educate people in the space. And you could spend a whole bunch of time, right, learning all of the accessibility guidelines and rules, but you have to question, is that going to be the best use of your time? If you find a partner, right, they'll be able to help you with an accessibility audit, help you give you UI, UX design principles, understanding the best governance expertise. So it can help streamline that process and help you get solutions much quicker. And one of the things that Amber has made mention of a couple different times is user testing with real world users using assistive technology devices. That can sound overwhelming, but you don't have to have dozens of these tests be run. If you actually just have one or two of these tests be run, you actually could learn some other things that are not only going to help with accessibility issues, but you also might help with general website user flow issues. Some of the times, right, when we're constantly in the process of working with organizations, we might be so deep into the forest that we forget to see the trees. And it could be the same with you and your organization. So having some of that third-party outside perspective can be really useful, even if it's just one or two real-life user tests. And another thing that's going to be beneficial, just as Amber had made mention of, is if you're continuously setting up accessibility review practices, you can have some of these reports, right? And these reports can actually show you how to prioritize the fixes, right? And it can provide you specific CMS or WordPress recommendations of what adjustments to make. So I'll give you a real life example, right? On our instance, right, we've made accessibility fails, right? And what we're in the process of doing is utilizing the Equalize Digital plugin, and we're going to document on our own website the errors that have been shown, and then we are going to fix those errors, and we're going to create a case study out of it. And we want to be guinea pigs. And those guinea pigs, it will just help you realize that across the board, right, if you have lots of different parties who are involved in your website, even if your website is accessible on day one, that doesn't mean 365 days later, it's still going to be accessible. And that happens time and time and time again with clients that we serve, even if we have and we're following 2.2 AA compliance, right? If we're not continuously and they're not committed to retaining that, it's going to get out of date, right? So you do need to have these principles in place and you do need to commit to it. So also partnering with the subject matter expert, they can really help guide you. Is it better to remediate or rebuild? Right? And some of these things, when you have outside counsel, it can make a lot of difference. So you can feel free to reach out and get in contact with myself. I'm happy to be able to spark up a conversation with you. I'm with an organization called Multidots. We focus on building enterprise WordPress solutions. We're globally recognized as far as being migration experts from platforms such as AEM, Adobe Experience Manager, Sitecore, Drupal, over to WordPress. We're proud to be able to work with many Fortune 500 companies here in the US and global organizations who are really looking for scalable, secure, and performance WordPress solutions. So just on the screen, we're showing some of the organizations that we've been proud to be able to work with, such as Ask Media Group, SiriusXM, Foursquare. And at the end of the deck, we're going to actually have a link if you want to spark up a conversation and talk a little bit more. We're offering something that allows you to be able to do so and get free guidance, something that we're calling 3 for free of consulting or code fixes directly for your website. And next, I want to introduce and pass it off to Amber, who's truly the expert in the space with their organization of Equalize Digital, who can be your accessibility partner. So Amber, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So Equalize Digital, if you aren't familiar with us yet, we're a mission-driven organization. We're a corporate member of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, and we are fully focused on WordPress accessibility. We do audits, remediations, user testing, and a lot of training like this. This is actually one of my passions. I really enjoy doing webinars and training, and also getting to learn from all the speakers that come to our webinars, since I don't always speak at them myself. And our software, Accessibility Checker, was a winner of a 2023 GADI Award for the work that we are doing in accessibility, which was a great honor. Our software is used by a variety of different organizations, from NASA. We were also the accessibility consulting team on the new NASA website, to the Veterans, U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. On the government side, higher ed, like Colorado State University, and a lot of different for-profit businesses, from Mint Mobile and Campaigns and Elections, which is a publisher, to organizations across the WordPress ecosystem, like WooCommerce and Stellar WP, who we both use our software and we also do manual auditing for. So if you are interested in starting your accessibility journey, we did say that we had some offers for people. These will be good for about 30 days, I believe. So until the end of October. Equalize Digital, you can go to our website, and hopefully we can also throw that link in the chat as well. If you are interested in getting a $997 micro audit, so that's a discount over what we normally charge. It is a manual audit by a trained and certified accessibility professional of your header, footer. It says homepage content, but we'll do any page. So if there's like a different page on your website, so that is a one-page thing. A call with me to discuss findings, recommendations, how to fix it. And then we also, if anyone is interested, there is a coupon code, which is Competitive Edge, all one word, that will give you a 20% discount on Accessibility Checker Pro. And then, Jeremy, you were talking about your 3 for free, but I don't know if you want to add anything here to that.
Yeah, so 3 for free, what it would be is there is a link to book a consulting call. So that'll be a 30-minute consulting call. And you can utilize it if you have just additional questions, right? Because I know we're going to come up on time and we're not going to have too much time for questions. So we can kind of talk about anything associated with your website, if that's accessibility items or questions, if that is just general items of a project that you're working on. And then the offer on top of that is we'd be able to offer 3 hours of free strategy, accessibility fixes, design work, development services. And there'd be no cost, no long-term commitment. And so you've taken commitment today to show up. So we want to make a commitment to be able to give back for anybody who does want to continue in on that journey and be able to make improvements directly on your website. And again, we're a WordPress-based agency. So if your site is outside of the WordPress space and you know that you're going to stay on another CMS platform, we will not be a good fit to be able to help out. And that offer of 3 for free would not apply. Still happy to be able to have a conversation, but we would not necessarily be able to go in and make those development fixes.
We can do auditing outside WordPress. I will say that is a nice thing. But we also are on the dev side, are very WordPress focused. So you can find both of us on LinkedIn if you just search for our names. So I'm Amber Hinds, spelled Hinds, Jeremy, Fremont for Fremont. And oh wait, are we missing an E? No, we're good with one E. I just noticed your name on your...
It's 3 for free, but the name only has 1 E. That's true.
I just noticed on your Zoom, it's different. It threw me off. But yep, so you can find us on LinkedIn. You can also go to equalizedigital.com or multidots.com to find us as well.